We've known you long enough to know what it's like.
The early mornings.
Whatever the weather.
The pests.
The weeds.
Diseases.
The demands of the crops.
The shops.
Rising expectations.
Tightening regulations.
Growing populations.
Putting food on everyone's table.
Caring about nature and the land.
And what you leave behind for future generations.
No wonder we think farming is the biggest job on earth.
No wonder it's getting bigger.
So, what can we do to help?
BASF. We create chemistry.
Agroubezpieczenia to polska marka należąca do Pocztowego Towarzystwa Ubezpieczeń Wzajemnych. Głównym celem agroubezpieczeń jest upowszechnianie ubezpieczeń rolnych i zwiększanie ich dostępności dla polskich rolników. Dzięki temu każdy rolnik może ubezpieczyć na poczcie to, co dla niego najważniejsze. Blisko swojego gospodarstwa, bez konieczności podróżowania do większych miejscowości.
W imieniu Fundacji Europejski Fundusz Rozwoju Wsi Polskiej oraz Agro-Promotion zapraszam do udziału w trzydniowym wydarzeniu EU Agro-trade Platform realizowanym w ramach Europejskiego Forum Rolniczego. Z uwagi na trwającą epidemię COVID-19 postanowiliśmy, że w tym roku zamiast tradycyjnych spotkań odbywających się stacjonarnie w Osiące koło Rzeszowa udostępnimy nowe narzędzie do networkingu i wymiany doświadczeń za pośrednictwem interaktywnej platformy online. Wykorzystując możliwości zdalnej komunikacji, postanowiliśmy również kontynuować tradycję merytorycznych dyskusji o najistotniejszych zagadnieniach dotyczących wsi i rolnictwa. Rynek rolno-spożywczy nie został dotknięty przez pandemię COVID-19 tak mocno jak inne branże, jednak miniony rok znacznie wpłynął na zasady jego funkcjonowania. Producenci rolni świadomi rosnących oczekiwań konsumentów w zakresie jakości żywności, ale również nowych wymagań stawianych w ramach wspólnej polityki rolnej, stoją przed wyzwaniem zapewnienia nie tylko bezpieczeństwa żywnościowego, ale takiego doboru systemów i środków produkcji, które zminimalizują negatywny wpływ na środowisko. Nie można jednak zapominać, że pandemia w wielu przypadkach spowodowała ograniczenie możliwości rozwoju przedsiębiorstw. W ramach inicjatywy EU Agro-trade Platform chcemy stworzyć przestrzeń do nawiązywania kontaktów biznesowych, tym razem wirtualnie. W ramach EU Agro-trade Platform chcielibyśmy również stworzyć profesjonalne narzędzie do wyszukiwania interesujących ofert współpracy na rynku lokalnym i międzynarodowym. Platforma skupia przedstawicieli sektora rolno-spożywczego z Polski oraz rynków zagranicznych. Tak jak wspominałem na wstępie, w czasie naszego wydarzenia w wirtualnym spotkaniu biznesowym będą towarzyszyły webinaria, w których udział wezmą eksperci z kraju i z zagranicy. W tym roku chcielibyśmy poruszyć zagadnienia dotyczące możliwości rozwoju eksportu polskich produktów rolno-spożywczych na rynki pozaunijne, znaczenia innowacji w rolnictwie, wykorzystania i wdrażania nowych rozwiązań i technologii w procesach produkcji rolnej i możliwości finansowania działań badawczo-rozwojowych w ramach wspólnej polityki rolnej oraz gospodarowania wodą w rolnictwie w obliczu zachodzących zmian klimatycznych i ograniczonej dostępności do zasobów wodnych. Dziękuję za zainteresowanie naszym wydarzeniem i udział w EU Agro-trade Platform. Życzę Państwu owocnych spotkań i interesujących dyskusji pod szyldem Europejskiego Forum Rolniczego.
So, as our president said, I would like to invite you to a discussion about Polish agricultural and food products in the outside markets, in the international markets, and I'll be moderating this debate. My name is Wojciech Szelong. We will hear from the following speakers. One person is with me in the studio, Łukasz Grabowski, Deputy Head of the Polish Agency for Investment and Trade. Good morning. And the other speakers are online, so we'll be hearing from Małgorzata Zawisza, Business Development Manager in the in Chengdu in China. So you work for the Polish Investment and Trade Agency. Good morning, madam. I hope you can hear us, at least nod if you hear us. We will hear from Justyna Sitarska, who is head of the International Office of the Polish Agency for Trade and Investment in Lagos, Nigeria. Andrzej Chodkowski, Chief Inspector for Seed and Plant Protection, Warsaw, Poland. Good morning. Krzysztof, who is managing the National Center for Agriculture and Farming Support. Good morning. We have a little bit of a lag in terms of your sound and vision, but still. Well, we also have John Clarke with us, who is who represents DG Agriculture and who's responsible for the development of rural areas. So representing the European Commission, and we have Andrzej Gantner, who is Vice President and General Director of the Polish Federation of Food Manufacturers. Good morning. So, ladies and gentlemen, just one technical remark or one comment. From the very beginning, you're welcome to our viewers and listeners from the very beginning can ask questions to our panelists. Please, if you ask a question, indicate which panelist you think should be the first one to start answering. And all these questions that I'm getting from you, I see them on my tablet. Please believe me, I have one with me, and I'll be able to see your questions in real time, and I'll be using them. So we will not do a Q&A session, but I will be using and quoting your questions as I go, as a moderator. So if there's anything that interests you, please immediately ask your question, and I'll be sure to ask it. I'll try to utilize as many of your questions as I can. Definitely, I will not hesitate when it comes to using your questions and asking our speakers. So, ladies and gentlemen, given the fact that we should be starting from diagnosing the whole situation that we're dealing with, the first question that it seems very obvious is that we need to identify possible obstacles, barriers to exporting Polish food products, what the barriers are, how to overcome them, because one can say that Polish producers, Polish food manufacturers have been breaking these barriers and overcoming these obstacles very successfully for years. But of course, any success can be bigger, any success could be multiplied if the right conditions are there, especially that we are now facing new challenges. These new challenges, on the one hand, are a threat, but on the other hand, an opportunity as well. Someone said, never waste a good big crisis. A good big crisis, it's not something that you can allow yourself to waste. So to my guests in the studio, Łukasz Grabowski, what are the main obstacles? Definitely the list of barriers and obstacles is there, and it's not an exhausted list. There's always something new coming in. Some of the obstacles may disappear from this list because we've learned how to bypass them or neutralize them. But I believe that all those obstacles to exports of our food products can be grouped into certain categories. One category are institutional barriers or obstacles. So all these things that are related to protectionism, like export or import taxes, certificates that are required when we're talking about products that are plant-based or animal-based, when you want to sell them abroad. Definitely red tape. Different countries have different levels of red tape, but red tape is always related to lots of other challenges. And you have to make sure that in your selling process, you allow enough time for all the customs procedures, all the bureaucracy, all the documents, and all the paperwork. Definitely, execution and of trade agreements, so legal barriers, because the level of adherence to trade agreements is different in different countries. We mostly are working or exporting our products to countries within the European Union, so there are rather few barriers. There are no tariffs or taxes. There are some non-tariff barriers, but they are not as, let's say, demanding as barriers that exist in non-EU markets. But definitely another category of obstacles are business obstacles. Definitely Polish businesses and anyone who is part of this value chain or this supply chain in the food and agricultural sector, they learn about those different business obstacles and they learn to live with them and to overcome them, but there are still a lot of them. Like, for example, making sure that Polish brands are well recognized, so building awareness of our Polish food and agricultural brands, dealing with a certain reluctance in terms of going outside of Poland to international markets, because it's like opening a new business, right? So it's a mental barrier. It's a psychological barrier. Yeah, it might be. People fearing the unknown, people not knowing how to talk to, well, sometimes language differences may be a problem, cultural differences, knowing how to negotiate with different business partners from third countries, you know, your typical behavior and so on and so on. Definitely awareness is growing. And we see, well, last year was record-breaking in terms of exports of food and agricultural products from Poland, but still, business-related and psychological barriers also are important. Director Grabowski gave us, well, you talked about three kinds of barriers: protectionism, business barriers. Well, you talked about protectionism, you talked about legal barriers, and then you talked about business barriers. Madam Sitarska, Justyna, when I was talking to you right before this conference, we were talking about protectionism, something that's been there and been a challenge for us. During this time of pandemic, grew, let's say, or exacerbated in certain countries. Given what's happened and given what's been happening with this pandemic, a lot of countries are trying to make sure, or at least they are saying that they would try to make sure to become more self-sufficient in terms of many areas of their lives. Also in Poland, we've been hearing talk about, for example, making our own personal protection products, so that we don't have to import them. And probably this also concerns and is related also to food products. So Justyna, over to you. Thank you so much for giving me this question. Indeed, this pandemic has revealed in many countries, especially emerging countries, that they are not fully self-sufficient from the point of view of foods. So being dependent on imports leads to problems, especially when a crisis hits. In case of Nigeria, maybe you know that definitely 90% of Nigeria's income is related to the sale of oil. But you know what's been happening with oil recently, so it hit Nigerian economy a lot. And of course, access to currencies. If there's no access to currencies, it's very difficult to import foods. And I think similar things happened to many emerging markets. So these emerging countries understood painfully that they had to bet on local production. So we encourage Polish companies to set up long-term strategies, share know-how, transfer technology, and invest locally in production and processing. Nigeria is a market with huge potential. It's the largest African economy, and still 60% of powder milk or dairy or milk products are imported. So there's a huge potential in this country. So please engage in some long-term thinking exercise not to waste this opportunity, because these opportunities that are here in Nigeria will not always be here. And everyone is looking at Nigeria and all the other emerging countries in Africa. When it comes to obstacles that Łukasz mentioned before me, I totally agree with what he said. I'm not sure if you can hear me. We can, sure. I do agree with all these obstacles and everything that he said, but I would like to also say that another obstacle may be in sort of the preparedness of Polish businesses. There is a number of categories, or there is a number of factors that we need to take into account if you want to export to emerging markets, especially Sub-Saharan Africa that I specialize in. Definitely, it's very important to prepare our offer in the right language. So if you think of Senegal or Cote d'Ivoire, you have to do it in French. Nigeria, Kenya has to be in English. All the paperwork, right? You may think that in Africa, African businesses have no idea what Europe or other continents have to offer, but actually, Africa is very much full of international businesses, and Nigerian importers know very well what's going on and what's on offer. So whatever we want to offer, it has to be tailor-made for the target market that we select. It's also very important to have the right language of product labels, French or English. But just having a sticker with French or English text may not be enough. If you're serious about a market like Nigeria with nearly 200 million population, the potential is huge, as you can imagine. You have to think also that about supporting your distributor in marketing activities. Sometimes it takes money. It's all about market registration, but also other marketing activities. Nigerians are very much attached to brands that they've known since childhood. Like, for example, when I came to Nigeria 10 years ago and I wanted to order tea, I was just saying, tea, please. But of course, the waiter looked at me confused, not knowing what I meant. So when I started explaining about tea, he said, Lipton, I get it. So for them, sometimes the names of international brands have taken over the names of categories. Like, for example, a breakfast cereal, it's called Quaker, a very iconic American brand of cereal. Yeah, we've known that from Poland. Like for my generation, all sneakers, we always call them Adidas. Yeah, that's true. Right, so yeah, to add maybe my last comment on, the preparedness of Polish businesses to work in Sub-Saharan Africa. Please come over, meet people face to face, because everyone likes to meet their potential partners face to face. Of course, possible if they can exchange a handshake or hug someone would be great. Of course, we have to stay safe in terms of COVID, but still, it's very important to come here in person. And of course, we're here to help you. Definitely, we will come back to African markets. Let's make sure that we're not talking about the African market. We're talking about African markets, plural. There's 54 markets over there, and they are vastly different from one another. So definitely I would like to continue with this line of conversation, but let's get back to other possible obstacles and barriers. Is there anyone from our panelists who would like to add something, maybe something about protectionism or red tape? Andrzej Chodkowski. Then Mr. Clarke.
Yes, I would like to add, insofar as the barriers that we have listed, the political barrier, if we remember 2014 and the Russian embargo on Polish apples, among other things. This was a horrible thing for Polish orchards, for the sector of trade production. But what is also very positive is that Polish entrepreneurs, Polish farmers were able to draw conclusions very quickly from this barrier to trade, and they've learned to open other markets, to work for the opening of other markets. This was a joint activity of the farmers and of the representatives of administration. For sure, we'll talk about it. So such institutions that I represent, for example, So it has to be said that a great barrier here are non-tariff limitations, sanitary or non-sanitary. In order to open the Chinese market for Polish apples, this was a lot of work. We had to prepare a number of reports of scientific papers in order to convince Chinese authorities that Polish apples will not be a threat for the orchards in China. They will not be a threat or a risk for consumers. And only after diplomatic efforts with the participation of the president, Polish diplomatic services resulted in such a situation that when the Secretary C came to Warsaw, we had an agreement signed and Polish apples reached the Chinese market. Not, of course, not in such amounts as we would expect, because the Chinese market is huge and everyone has a lot of hopes related to that. But we are still at the stage of promotion, of networking, trade networking, and this Chinese example shows that breaking through this administrative barrier, bureaucratic barrier, is the first step. We have to continue our efforts in order to tap into the potential of this market. After the breakdown of the Russian market, we've managed to get rid of those barriers insofar as India, Thailand, Taiwan. So the Asian countries have a big potential. But what is also interesting, also Colombia, Costa Rica, got open for Polish fruit, and it would be good if Polish companies, Polish traders would use this potential of the administrative work that has been already developed. Thank you very much. With the political barriers, well, they are individual or peculiar. Like you've mentioned, the Russian market and Polish fruit, the closure of this market has mobilized beautifully Polish producers to find new markets. So we can say that this closure of the market was treated by Polish producers not as a barrier, but as a challenge, and they've lived up to that challenge. Mr. Clarke wanted to say a few words about it, and afterwards, Mr. Andrzej Clarke. Mr. Clarke, please.
Thanks. Good morning. Do you hear me all right? Can you hear me? I think there are sort of three kinds of obstacles that we face as exporters. One is tariffs. They still are a problem. You take India. Polish vodka pays 150% duty in India. Polish apples, I think, pay 80% duty. So those tariff obstacles are still around in some countries. Secondly, you mentioned the SPS sanitary barriers, very, very serious. China still doesn't approve imports of beef from Poland 20 years after BSE. So we're doing all we can to try and reduce those barriers. And then there are sort of black swans, if you like, geopolitical obstacles that one cannot predict. The Russian ban of 2014 is one. Brexit, another one. The COVID pandemic last year, which closed down the food service sector, and then the Airbus-Boeing dispute, which led to penalties on European exports of wine, of spirits, cheese, etc. So that there are geopolitical black swans that we cannot predict. But I think the future is actually quite rosy. The previous speaker mentioned that the Russian ban was a very good wake-up call to Polish business to diversify, and I think that is the key. And we've seen in the last year with the COVID pandemic, the importance of having diversified markets and diversified sources of supply. And as the colleague from in Lagos said, there are many new opportunities in emerging markets. The growth is going to be outside Europe, with rapidly growing populations around the world who need to eat. Africa will have a 1 billion strong middle class by 2050, and there are massive opportunities there in Africa, in particular, and not to say in China and East Asia, which are still growing. There's demand for food. There's an increasing appreciation and demand for European safety, sustainability, quality. And I guess the colleague who is with us from Chengdu can confirm that the Chinese mothers like European infant formula and milk powder, just to give one example. And we have a lot of new free trade agreements coming on stream now with Mexico, Vietnam, Colombia was mentioned, Canada, Korea, Japan. Our exports to Japan grew by 16% last year in the first year of the free trade agreement, and the Mercosur agreement and Indonesia and others coming down the pipeline. So I think the medium to long-term prospects for the agri-food sector are very positive. And even in 2020, which was a very, very difficult year for all the reasons I've given, European and Polish agri-food exports actually grew, despite all of the difficulties. So I think we can be fairly confident that we will be able to tap into these emerging markets in the years ahead with the very, very wide, diversified basket of agri-food products that the EU and Poland can provide to the world.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clarke. And then now Mr. Andrzej Gardner, who'd like to speak. I see that Madam Małgorzata in Chengdu is fighting with technology. I wanted to ask you something, Madam Małgorzata, but first, Mr. Andrzej Gardner. I think that we could list a lot of barriers that are problematic for the export of Polish food, but we didn't talk about one very important barrier, purely economic barrier. It's the level of income of, sorry, interruptions. So the level of income is lower compared to Europe. The latest research shows that we are still competitive insofar as price. So we have good quality products, but actually we're competitive because we have lower prices. And we have to be aware of that. This barrier has to be taken into consideration, because looking at what Europe wants to be in the food production or economy in general, and I'm talking about the Green New Order, Europe wants to have high-quality food, environmental friendly food, organic food. Unfortunately, all that will cost a lot, and there will be a lot of price rises in Europe. But we'll have cleaner environment and better quality of products. But we should remember that the growing prices there will be growing prices of food that we'll want to export as well. And I think that we should think strategically so it doesn't become one big barrier in our export. We have to create a strategy that will push this burden, the price burden, on quality. Japanese, well, Asia in general believes that food from Europe is relatively clean, organic, safe, and these are the advantages that I believe that in future that this middle class that will be growing, that has grown already in China, is willing to pay a higher price. But if we put our advantage only on price, this economic barrier might become a very huge problem, especially if we look at the fact that the majority of countries, even those that are not self-sufficient food-wise right now, is planning investments in this area. Let's look at what China has planned for the next 15 Yes, well, self-sufficiency and the development of rural areas is a priority. In my opinion, Europe has to think about it very seriously, how to play this issue and how to promote European, including Polish food. And in my opinion, this is a very important barrier. Yet another barrier that was mentioned here, and it's worth stressing, is the growth of the level of risk in food trading because of the instability of markets, especially in third countries. We can see very clearly that some markets can close overnight for many reasons, not because of some non-tariff barriers being created, but also because of wrongly understood safety, security, or feeling vulnerable for one or another reason. And also pandemics, which do appear also with agricultural production, like different diseases of plants and animals. So we have to remember that the stability has gone down. And to overcome these barriers, we have to create mechanisms to compensate this risk for exporting companies, because unfortunately, very often what happens is that they lose a lot of money, and it turns out that the initial benefits from exports are consumed by the losses that appear later. So we have to take all that into consideration. And of course, also non-tariff barriers, which we have felt ourselves in the EU. And unfortunately, they keep developing. And this is still, for us, the most important market, and it will continue to be the most important market for us. Non-tariff barriers like image barriers, for instance, and this necessity to make sure that our image, the image of our food, not only that we promote that we are good, that we have good quality, but also that we have to actively react to all negative information or statements that appear around our food. Sometimes they're just generated by our competitors, but every country that is thinking seriously, strategically about their economic interests has this part of the protection of their interests very well developed. Thank you very much. For now, we define these risk factors, and thank you for adding to our list next two. I just want to add another one. I'm sorry. My headphones were falling down. I wanted to ask a question to Madam Małgorzata Zawisza. And there is a paradox insofar as barriers go. It's the size of the Chinese market. But please comment also on other markets if you want, because this is such a huge market. This is such a great challenge and an opportunity. But the size, the sheer size of the market might frighten a middle-sized producer, or even not even to mention a small-sized producer, not to talk about costs, time, and activities that they have to perform to sell anything on that market. They just really confused at times. And the question is if such a market would be interested in relatively small amounts of goods from smaller producers. So how to deal with the Chinese scale, in your opinion? I don't even know if you can hear me. Yes? I'll say the following. Unfortunately, I wouldn't look at China. I wouldn't look at China as a country, because it's, insofar as size, it's like a continent. China is very diversified, and every region, every area of China is a bit different. What you've mentioned, the size of China, yes, this is a huge problem. Poland in China is perceived very often as a raw material country, and the inquiries which are sent are related to big amounts of products. for instance, milk or oil. And it turns out that even big, relatively big Polish producers are unable to ensure such amounts. Unfortunately, when an inquiry comes, sometimes these are several thousands of containers for just one recipient. It turns out that Polish enterprises, even those which are big from our perspective, from the perspective of the Chinese traders, are small. While the Chinese consumer right now is becoming an aware consumer who's searching for, I would call it, a unique product. So if an entrepreneur appears and has a product that might not even exist on the market, or has a product for which they have a very good idea, in my opinion, they can be very successful. The problem on Chinese markets, this is not only a Chinese problem, this is a problem on Eastern markets, Far East markets. Some products that are successful in Europe are not so much used in China. Such a product is cheese. And Chinese don't really use it. So it turns out that we're dealing with a market where 60% of the consumption of the entire cheese is only in HoReCa sector, and all others are expats who live in China. An average Chinese person, with the exception of visiting a Western restaurant and tasting cheese, hard cheese, and not even to mentioning like cottage cheese types that don't exist at all. Sometimes the Chinese will like the cheese and they'll want to eat it more. But so the barrier of the size of the market, but there is a huge entry barrier entering the market. It is not about supplying the product, but also promoting the product. Right now, China is a market of sales where we have to teach the consumer, show them certain elements. But this is also a market where everyone is already present, and Polish producer entering this market has to show their competitive edge, if they're from Europe or Australia or North America, it doesn't matter. It turns out that the cost that has to be invested in the marketing of the product, in the promotion, in bringing it to the right platforms, especially the electronic ones, is a very costly thing. So the question is, how much Polish entrepreneurs or European entrepreneurs are able to afford such expenses, because this is a great investment. This is a good step always when we are thinking about a given market as a market with prospects. But very often what happens is that Asian markets, also because of the geographical distance, appear as a new market, emerging market in the strategy of a given company. And very often what turns out that the expenditure that should be spent for the expansion on that market are too big, too huge, and they're related to too big of a risk for a given company. Thank you very much. Will anyone like to comment on that? Just one sentence. Małgorzata mentioned a very important thing, which is the scale of operations. If we look at the structure of the production of Polish agriculture, we are dealing with a huge network of small farms. We have significant producers on the scale of Poland or on the scale of Europe insofar as food goes. But if we look at the list of 100 leading companies producing food, in the 100, there's not even one Polish enterprise. The last 10, this is about 3.5 billion euro per year. Our enterprises, this is about 1.5, 2 billion euros. So we still have some work to do. And maybe this is also a challenge ahead of the Polish agri-food sector. So talking about the consolidation of activities, of operations, and consolidation of activities in the sectoral organizations.
So before we consolidate in Poland, and before we concentrate on talking about Poland, there is a hint, and there is a hint or something that leads us towards solution. Once we've defined problems, let's talk about possible solutions. But let me lead in by asking about exports of Polish food and agricultural products in the European context, because sometimes or often in one sentence, Polish exporters and European exporters and producers are mentioned, just in one sentence. And it seems that, for example, when we're talking about China and the sheer scale of China, we've just talked about China, Małgorzata said that China was more of a continent rather than a country. And we, the European Union, not Poland, the European Union, we are a continent as well. So maybe this means that Polish manufacturers should take advantage of the vehicle that the European Union is, namely because of the scale, because of the fact that, well, historically speaking, our European partners like France seems to sort of be helpful in opening some African markets where we will never, of course, have the same starting point as the French, who used to have colonies there, right? Unlike Poland. But that's an example of how we can use our European Union partners. And we have to think about how to promote European food products, or actually promoting Polish foods under the banner of the European Union. But even within the European Union, Polish food products have huge competition. So how to deal with competition within the European Union so that we can do business together under the flag of the European Union rather than competing against one another. I have an example. Maybe it's from a different area, but maybe it will be inspiring to you. I was surprised, maybe you will be surprised as well when you learn that Poland sells more copper. Poland sells more copper inside devices to China. So copper that's been processed and put in as part of a device than raw copper. But the problem is that usually copper that is in those devices are made in Germany. Or actually the devices are made in Germany, even though it has Polish copper. They have Polish copper in it. So actually, maybe in food and agriculture, it's the same way to go. You know, Poland versus China, we will never change the huge difference in sizes, right? But maybe we can solve this problem differently. So over to John Clarke.
No, thanks very much. I was inspired to intervene on the issue of promotion. I think the EU has a very, very important and well-funded promotion instrument, which it's worth 200 million euros a year. Half of that money is for promoting European food and drink outside the single market, so in China and the rest of the world. And we simply ask that food companies, agri cooperatives, federations match our funding by 20%. So 80% is EU funded, 20% from the agri-food sector itself. This is a very successful program, multi-annual, but Poland is not really using it as much as it could. A lot of the promotion programs are being done by Greek or Italian or Spanish companies and agri-food sectors. I think in the last few years, there are only six Polish companies or sectors have used the promotion program, and so I think you should really look into this and try to increase the Polish presence in our international promotion programs, whether it be on apples and fruits, or jams and jellies, or organic beef or poultry, or Polish vodka. You know, there are many opportunities. You have a very diversified agri-food sector in Poland, but you're not using our promotion instrument as much as you could. So I would encourage you to do that and to really focus on what one of the other speakers said, quality niche products, where I think Poland has a very good story to tell. Thank you.
Right, so I have one question to you, sir. Why do you think Polish manufacturers are not so keen to take advantage of this system, this program? Is it too complex? Is it too complicated? Or maybe this contribution of 20% is still too much for SMEs, for small and medium producers? So why do you think the presence is not as high as it could be?
I guess it's because historically Poland was not looking at the rest of the world for its economic success. Polish agriculture has been very much focusing on the European single market. I mean, about half of Poland's agri-food exports are to other EU member states. So I think historically Poland was not looking as much to the emerging markets around the world or the USA. That is changing a little bit. As I said, we have 6 examples in the last 7 or 8 years of Polish agri-food businesses joining our promotion programs, but it's still quite a small number. I suppose it's the agri-food sector in Poland is less familiar, less aware of the opportunities of this promotion program, and perhaps in some sectors you are quite fragmented. I mean, Poland is a country of very small farms in general, and perhaps your farm sector is not as consolidated and aggregated as it could be. You don't have the economies of scale, and then you don't have very powerful federations for particular sectors to promote their interests. I don't know, but I think I don't believe that the 20% contribution is a barrier. There are other member states, food federations, agricultural sectors, which are in a similar economic situation to Poland, who have been Greece, for example, who participate very actively in the promotion program. So I think the financial issue is not a barrier.
Right, thank you. This is very interesting, and it refers to what Łukasz Grabowski said, that the consolidation in Poland, if it happened, would mean more opportunities to sort of more fully take part in what the European Union offers in terms of these programs. We have Krzysztof with us, who wanted to say something from the National Center for Agricultural Support. So, would you like to say something about taking advantage of the promotion program? Yes, well, the National Center for Agricultural Support, we are the ones to operate this European Union and European Commission programs, and we help businesses. And I would like to say the 20%, the contribution, it's not a barrier at all, especially that this is regulated by another set of funds. So I don't think it's an obstacle. I would say awareness or the consciousness of the fact that you can expand to third countries. the level of awareness is really low, and it's just picking up speed. It's just growing. Indeed, people, well, if there are some simple, not too complicated programs to take advantage of, businesses start or become interested. But there are few organizations that go it alone. Usually, these are groups or associations of companies. Right now, the National Center for Agriculture Support, we administer 6 such programs. 2 are targeted at the US, 2 Asian countries. 1 is targeting CEE, and there is 1 more that is targeting the Middle East. Right. So this means that what we're offering right now, what you're offering right now, is maybe not working. Well, because if we wait for Polish exporters to become mature enough to take advantage of these opportunities, it could take years and decades, and so many opportunities may be simply lost forever. So my question goes to Krzysztof, how we can encourage them more to take advantage of what's out there on the table. Before we started the conference, I talked to someone. There was news 2 days ago saying that the British food exports simply broke down completely, especially that if they wanted Brexit, here you go. This is what happens. But with British whiskey, well, maybe there's nothing more we can do in terms of British whiskey that's not being exported. We're not going to make our own. But for example, beef, this could be an opportunity for Polish manufacturers to replace British beef or other food categories, given the fact that they've now broken down a little bit. Well, sir, we are actively encouraging and motivating Polish exporters to expand, to go to third countries outside of the European Union. Last year, we organized a survey. We conducted a survey asking different companies whether they were interested in going to African markets. And in this survey, we asked the respondents to indicate what they expect from the government and what obstacles they saw in terms of expansion. First of all, I would say those who haven't yet gone outside of the European Union, they don't know about, or they don't know regulation and legislation in those third countries that they may consider. They also want to know what kinds of products might be attractive in certain parts of the world. So yeah, they need basic knowledge. Basic knowledge, yes. This is what they need. And we actively respond to all the queries, all the questions they send us, because sometimes they ask about African markets, sometimes they ask about Asian markets, but they generally want to know the same things. Indeed, 2020, the year of COVID-19, was very special. We organize around 20, normally we organize around 20 site visits where we go to different fairs, to different trade shows. We organize webinars, we organize B2B events and meetings so that Polish exporters can learn about the different markets of interest in order to conquer them successfully. Right now we're focusing on African markets, but definitely this year we planned 18 out of trade shows that we planned to visit, out of 18, 8 that we're going to visit are going to be in Asia. Right. Very interesting. And how manufacturers and producers of food perceive the situation. So over to Andrzej Gantner. Well, it was a very, very, I would say, correct diagnosis of the situation. We are now catching up, and we need to catch up, not just because because Polish companies are reluctant to associate and create trade associations. But, for example, in a lot of countries like France or Spain, such huge federations and industry organizations, they've been around for 70 years or more. They have huge budgets, for example. I've managed to see the Association of Italian Producers of Traditional Foods. This one association has a bigger budget than we have for our entire promotion of food and beverages. And this is just one association. Definitely we are fragmented. We are very distributed. Every single industry has several industry organizations. So we have quite a lot of organizations that are rather weak financially, and they are not so good organizationally. Definitely, sooner or later, we will consolidate. It will have to happen, because definitely we're losing out on the fact that we don't have those strong industry organizations that Mr. Clarke mentioned, because this stops us from taking advantage of what's out there, or it's difficult to organize common joint promotional activities. Like, for example, in Denmark, in many countries around the world, embassies, Danish embassies, or there are people sent out that work within the Danish embassy to take care of promotion of Danish products. So it's not really, it's simply because the whole idea of, let's say, self-government and self-regulation, this idea was actually very much killed in the last 70 or 100 years. So we need to rebuild it, right? So in order to catch up sooner rather than later, maybe we could, for example, make sure that Polish exporters become more active in taking advantage of what the European Union gives us. So maybe we can catch up by sort of leaping a few stages forward and already start taking advantages of what the European Union gives us. Yes, well, definitely, I agree. The European Union has given us the opportunity to sort of latch on and take advantage of this entire huge structure for promoting food products. But also, we need to when one thinks about promoting the European Union, but only on condition that they would promote themselves, this will not work. When we promote the European Union, we need to promote the whole community. And then it's up to us, our competitiveness, to win as Poland, as Polish products. And definitely, support coming from the European Union will not do everything for us. We will have to do a lot of things ourselves. But we have to be as present as possible. We have to take advantage of the support tools, the assistance tools as possible. And please note, and it's very, very important, namely free trade agreements. Think about it, how controversial a lot of free trade agreements are. But actually, usually, if such agreements are signed, we are the beneficiaries. And we can actually overcome a lot of barriers thanks to such trade agreements. Like, for example, exporting into Vietnam. Canada is also working very well. We need to remember that all the statistics and all the numbers are telling us one important thing. Unless we have more free trade agreements or common trade agreement, then the European Union within several years will lose 50% of its influence all over the world, or a lot of its influence all over the world. So we have to do as much as possible to make sure that these EU funds and programs to promote our sector, they should be visible, they should be top of the agenda of many governments across the European Union. And secondly, we need to support strategic free trade agreements, because otherwise, if we don't have these free trade agreements, the funds may not help us all that much. In the coming decade, we have to also consolidate, also inside Poland.
Thank you very much. I see that two persons would like to take the floor, Mr. Clarke and Mr. Grabowski, but I'm going to give you the floor in a second, because continuing this theme, I would like to ask Madam Justyna Sitarska, who's there in Nigeria. This is a place which is an absolute abstraction for the majority of Poles. I would like to ask you about this last theme. If on such a big, huge market and very exotic for us, what do you believe? That it should be the promotion should be made in Poland, or maybe made in EU, or maybe combining both? I suspect that an average Nigerian is where the EU is, more or less, but where Poland is, not necessarily. So maybe I'm suggesting the answer a little bit. Thank you very much for this question. This is very interesting. I think that Nigeria is an abstraction also for Nigerians, so it's not surprising that it is an abstraction for Poles. Insofar as the awareness of existence of Poland in Nigeria, unfortunately, despite our very hard work, insofar as the promotion of Polish producers, sometimes we say Poland, and they ask us if it's Holland, Netherlands. So not entirely this awareness of Poland is as developed as we would like it to be. Well, it's good that the Dutch have helped us a little bit, changing the name of the state. It's no longer Holland, it's the Netherlands. So, yeah, it is helping us. Nevertheless, the importers, distributors who work with big brands know Poland. They know about Polish products as well. It doesn't mean that we don't have a lot of work to do, because it still does exist. Answering questions, if we should promote it as made in Poland, made in European Union, or made together, well, it depends on what will work on the Nigerian market. Living here for over 10 years, I know out of experience that sometimes it is difficult to predict the reactions of the Nigerian market. So it would be the best to test all three options. Of course, as a foreign trade bureau, we operate here concentrating on made in Poland, because, of course, our competitors from France, Spain, UK, United States, India, China have been operating here for many years, and they have also huge promotion budgets for the promotion of their own brands. So we are concentrating on made in Poland, but I would be very curious to test the approach made in European Union, choosing some specific niche products from various European countries to test how it would work on such a huge market as Nigeria. Right now, there is this small consolidation between European countries and Poland insofar as the presence of Polish food products in Nigerian supermarkets. Sometimes Polish producers don't even know that their products are available in Nigerian supermarkets, because they work directly with the consolidators from the UK or France or the Netherlands, and they buy different products from various European countries, and afterwards they are available in the Nigerian supermarkets, and the producers are not aware of that at all. So the consolidation does exist, of course, but this is not, of course, the scale that we would expect. I hope that this answers the question. Thank you very much. I'm very much surprised with this diagnosis that Polish producers, Polish exporters can be present on African state market and they don't even know it. This is a paradox. Couldn't we tackle that a little bit so we could do it in a more aware way? Yeah, we should take care of this. This partially results from the fact that in the delivery chains, Polish producers are dependent on the different agencies who mediate. So they're from France, from Germany, from the Netherlands. And producers are very often surprised that they can see their product on a shelf in Lagos, Johannesburg, or Chile. This is one of the elements that we should work on, of course, and this is connected to our work with co-financing exports and with the information barrier. We have to promote and we have to encourage Polish companies to tap into all support elements that they can get on the national market and on the broadly understood European market, EU market, in order to invest in production locally. So as Justyna has mentioned, if we want to be present on Nigerian market with, for instance, dairy products, why wouldn't we open a factory there on site, or maybe a processing plant, or some kind of warehouse or a cooling place? At the same time, the local workforce is finding employment, so we have a better opinion in the eyes of the administration. There is also co-financing. There's financing because there are dividends, there are some transfers. This is something that Poland should work with, because nowadays Poland food and more broadly Polish products reach foreign countries under the brands of our partners. And we are losing on that. We lose the margin, we lose the profits, huge profits, because the mentioned price competition. This is one of the strategies to open the markets. But if we want to open ourselves to the entire world, and we want to do this, there will always be a country that will produce something cheaper and faster. China, for instance, gets a lot of agri-food products, and not only, also raw materials from Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, and other countries, and the transportation should be also included in the cost of expansion. Going back to the subject, how to use European Union as a jumping board to speed up certain processes, I agree with Mr. Gardner that we should be much more active, and we should speak about it loudly when we negotiate the free trade agreement, so that the Polish interests and the interests of Polish sectors would be also important, as well as the associations in Germany, France, or Italy. There are more and more such agreements right now signed. Right now we are talking to Australia and New Zealand. These are very interesting markets, but they are very difficult because the agricultural sector in New Zealand, if we open ourselves to that, this is the meat sector and dairy that can also reach European markets. So there's the question about the competition. Are we able to compete with these countries? And another commentary, there is an agreement with Far East countries, Japan, Singapore, Vietnam, Canada also. These are markets full of prospects, very important. And we co-organize various events, information events, or some fairs, trade shows, and it doesn't mean that on the first day of the agreement being in force ensures our entering into the market, because this is a very vulnerable sector. Every country, this is one of the basic safeties or securities in economy. So only in the long term, in the perspective of 5, 10, or 15 years, the tariff barriers disappear. In case of Japan, meat has up to 40% or sweets or dairy, and these levels will go down to 1 digit or sometimes even 0 only within a few years. But this work should be done already. We should network, we should promote Polish products, of course. But it's not that free trade agreement will solve all our problems. It's very important, but we have to work on the promotion. We should add that every EU country has their own commissioner. Of course, I understand that the commissioner doesn't represent a given country, but works on behalf of the entire EU. But it is interesting that the Polish commissioner is the one that deals with agriculture. So for sure, it's not problematic insofar as the cooperation with the EU in this area. Mr. Clarke wanted to say something, please.
Thanks. I think we can be collectively quite optimistic about the future and for Poland's agri-food trade. 10 years ago, exports out of the EU were about 6% of agri-food production. Today, they're about 13%. So exports is the future. Look at Poland. Your exports to the outside the EU grew by 10% last year. Yeah, so you're exporting 10 billion euros outside the EU compared to 5 billion 10 years ago. So you are part of this success. Now, you mentioned that Poland has to catch up with other member states, and maybe you can leapfrog other member states in terms of your presence on foreign markets. I think the fact that today we have Justina in Lagos and Magda in Chengdu is a demonstration that Poland is actually looking to the long term. Is very advanced in its thinking. That you see these markets for the future. Chengdu is a population of 9 million people. It's the size of Belgium in terms of population. Lagos, Nigeria, the biggest market in Africa, and you're in the right places to actually where the growth will come from in the next 20 years. And these countries, China and Africa, they are going to be import dependent in the future. They will and they must increase domestic production of food, but they will still need to be import dependent, and Europe can supply part of that import need. In Africa, we are from the Commission point of view, we are prioritizing the African market in the next 20 years because we know it's going to grow, and Nigeria is a good example. It will be less dependent on energy in the future, and will need to import some of its food. And we are with European agri-food companies and cooperatives. We are organising events now in Nigeria to bring together European companies and African producers, so that there can be a combination of trade imports into Africa, but also investment in local production. And we're also helping to put in place an Africa-wide free trade agreement. This will be the biggest FTA in the world, and that's going to actually stimulate a lot more demand for food around Africa. And again, Europe is in a good position to supply some of Africa's food needs. So I think the future is actually quite rosy. We can be quite optimistic. The last speaker mentioned that FTAs are not the panacea. I agree, they're not, but they are a useful tool in our toolbox. About 35% of our trade now is under FTA, so preferential access. That will increase with Mercosur and Australia and Indonesia and others. And the net result of all of our trade agreements for the agri-food sector is positive. We've done a study recently looking at the cumulative impact of all of our FTAs for the European agri-food sector, including for sensitive products like beef or sugar or poultry, and the outcome is actually positive. We have a net surplus taking all the FTAs together, including Mercosur. We'll continue having a net trade surplus in exporting to all our FTA partners. So I think the future is very, very positive for all of the reasons that colleagues have been discussing this morning. And Poland is very much part of that positive future for agri-food exports.
Thank you, Mr. Clarke, not only for your knowledge, but also for this optimism, never subsiding optimism that comes from every single one of your comments. Mr. Andrzej Chodkowski wanted to say something, please. I wanted to stress the need of European solidarity and joint actions, joint activities. I remember in 1919 where we went to a big food fair in Dubai to agree on technical conditions on exports of food, but also to promote our food products. This fair was visited by the Commissioner Hogan at that time. He was present at all national stands. He came to the Polish stand also, and he said to a big group of journalists that Poles produce fantastic food, that the food is safe, healthy, and he recommends it. So this was really amazing, and I believe that this effect, the promotional effect, was very important because export from Poland to the United Emirates is developing. United Arab Emirates is developing. But I wanted to say one more thing, that the joint activities in order to have access to markets is very important, but sometimes bilateral activities of single countries bring better effects. Mr. Clarke, in one of his earlier statements or interventions, has said that India is one of those markets that has many various barriers, and it's difficult for Europe to come to an agreement with regards to that. I would like to give you an example where the activities of Polish diplomacy and Polish administration gave a good effect, brought about a good effect. India has a technical solution which blocks exports from Europe. They require fumigation of food products with a substance which is banned in Europe, believed to be very toxic, non-environmentally friendly. For the majority of European countries, this is a huge barrier because they cannot use this fumigation in their products and export them to India. But we've managed 3 years ago, after long discussions and presenting many arguments, many scientific arguments, to find a technical solution in such a way that apples are stored in a low temperature for long enough time. Initially, India didn't want to accept that. But I just want to tell you as an anecdote how sometimes completely unexpected views at a different matter, maybe not at the food itself, but the system of values rather can influence the decision. 3 years ago, we have invited the Ministry of Agriculture from India to visit Poland. He sent his deputy, and for a few days we were visiting different orchards, different storage rooms, warehouses, and we have shown him the state-of-the-art production lines for sorting apples, preparation of apples, but he was not very much in favor of all that. But during our one last day, we visited the old town, and I noticed that this deputy minister had interest in a photograph which is showing the Warsaw that was destroyed in 1945. And this person was so interested in what happened to our city. Then on the next day, although he had a different agenda, let's say a lighter agenda, tourism-oriented, he went to the Museum of the Polish Uprising, and he spent a few hours to see what has actually happened in Poland during the Second World War. When I was taking him to the airport, we were talking only about this tragedy of our nation and about how the nation was reborn. And I believe that this trait of understanding, insofar as values, some historical aspects, had great significance. It actually was something that influenced the fact that as one of a few European countries, we have access to this market, and this method of cooling apples or storing apples in cool temperature was accepted, and the export is growing year to year. I wanted to say something about it because in the program of our discussion, we have also the issue of diplomatic efforts that are supposed to support exports. So we can treat this as an example of using those common values, common understanding in order to build the community, not based on data only, on technical information, scientific information only, but also on the creation of deeper relationships that are also serving our economy well. You actually said what I wanted to say, that this is an excellent example of economic diplomacy. The diplomacy is usually understood that it's supposed to overcome certain barriers, like cultural barriers. You have shown very well that diplomacy is also about finding some things in common, not necessarily in the agricultural activity or trade activity that we are talking about today, but in a very human or even personal aspects. We didn't tackle this theme. Maybe I don't want to open it, but it's worth mentioning that in many countries we still have, as one of few positive legacies from the Polish Socialist Republic, a lot of graduates from Polish universities who do speak Polish still. This is Vietnam, Morocco, and some other countries. I don't have an impression that we've been perfectly using this opportunity, which should enable us in many places to put our food in a given market. Madam Justyna, please, did you want to say something about that? I just wanted to add that in Nigeria there's an association of Polish alumni which work very closely to the embassy. These are people who have studied in Poland, who are open to any relationships with Poles, both social and business relations, and we should congratulate the embassy, which is really working very closely with this society or association of Polish alumni from Polish universities. So together with the embassy, we also try to tap into this legacy. Yeah, we don't have this legacy of colonies, but we have a very positive legacy of students or heritage of students that used to be in Poland, used to study in Poland. I would like to move smoothly into another subject that might be interesting to us. We are talking about the export of Polish food outside of EU, but it's never because of differentiation of these markets. It's not the only export. We should be selling various things to various places, taking into consideration the demands, the cultural conditions, climatic conditions also. So how, in your opinion, we can deal with this challenge that Polish producer who would like to sell their product, for instance, also to Latin America, to Africa, and to Far East Asia, would have to sell to 3 extremely different markets, or not to treat it as one market. I keep remembering what Madam Justyna has said, African countries is not one market, but many markets. So can we somehow define which one of these markets or which one of these continents, maybe like that, which one of these directions, locations is most difficult for us, and if there is anything lacking as tools go, instruments go, to tackle these difficulties?
Krzysztof, if you would like to say something. Ladies and gentlemen, looking at different markets and trying to evaluate which would be easiest, which would be toughest, one could look at it from the perspective of exports value. So looking at exports value-wise. Last year, the total value of Polish exports was 34 billion Polish zlotys, so 2 billion more than the previous year. which is really a great success of the Polish businesses given such tough times. 80% of these, or a considerable portion, goes to the European Union and the rest outside of the European Union. We would intuitively expect that our greatest trade partner among third countries would be Asian countries, but not really. In the East, in Asia, we have China, 1.4 billion, and India, also huge population, huge markets. But these two markets, in terms of the value of our Polish exports, they're not really at the top of our exports. At the top, we have Middle East and Saudi Arabia, where we exported the goods worth 700 million euro. And then we have the States. The value of our exports is around 550 million euro. And then some African states, Algeria and South Africa, 200 million euro. And then comes China. The value of our exports last year, 200 million euro. To make things even more interesting, when we're talking about second largest country from the point of view of population, India, our exports to India is practically non-existent. Last year it was like 10 million, worth 10 million euro. And this is due to a lot of barriers, a lot of obstacles that India puts in front of possible importers or possible exporters. Definitely, last year, apples were a hit, but still, currently there are more and more barriers in place. So this market, India, instead of growing, will shrink for us. Right. What about last year? Was Great Britain counted as EU or as a non-EU country? No. They were part of the EU, so 80% went into the EU, right? But now these proportions will change, right? Especially that when we talk about, because UK, it used to be second largest after Germany, 8% of our total volume. So now, given the fact that they are not in the European Union, they are the largest non-EU partner for Poland, definitely. I agree with what you said. Middle East, Maghreb, Israel, yes. But when it comes to Africa, last year we also partner with Mozambique and Tanzania. However, exporting into those countries, whatever we sell there, they are very basic goods. So we're using volumes, and price is on our side because we're exporting grains like wheat. We're exporting plant-based fats and animal feeds. So these are not processed goods. Margins are not high. Profits are not very high. So we have to look at it from the point of view of what we're selling and who is it for and whether it's highly processed or not. Top quality, highly processed goods, when we think about, maybe bio or eco products or vegan, definitely Asian markets are opening to such products very much. And also the US market that you've mentioned. China and the US are the largest importers of food in general in the world. And I like this comparison that I saw at one point. The value of Polish food exports to China is 1/4 of sales, of total sales of food in Slovakia. Andrzej Gantner is saying something. I'm not sure if you're speaking to us. Probably you're muted or what's happening. Andrzej's microphone is muted. Can we somehow let him know? Can we somehow let him know that we can't hear him? Because Andrzej continues to speak, we cannot really let him know if he's muted. Can we contact him somehow to let him know? I would like to hear what he's saying, so let him know. Let's let him know. Right, so while we're trying to contact Mr. Gantner to tell him that his microphone is muted, oh, I couldn't hear you. Sorry, there was a second there where I couldn't hear you. Yeah, we couldn't hear you either. We saw you speak, but we had no idea. We were thinking maybe you had another conversation with someone else at a different conference. Yeah, I did that a little bit. Yeah, but still. But well, hopefully you heard that we talked about the variety of our export directions and where we're trying to export. Would you like to repeat what you just said when you were muted? Well, there is a lot of variety. Our exports are quite diversified in terms of directions. Russia has actually shown what's happening if a certain sector depends on very few markets rather than on a diversified basket. However, the European Union is 80%, right, of our food exports. However, now it's going to be less because UK went out of the European Union, and we feel that it affects us as exporters. Despite of all sorts of agreements and so on, our exports to Great Britain really fell due to red tape. But actually, you shouldn't put all your eggs into one basket. Therefore, it's very important for us to diversify. And I agree. Increased exports in 2020, the growth of exports actually happened because of our exports into third countries. So third countries contributed here to this growth, and we should continue. When it comes to world regions, if we want to compete not only with price, but also with quality, we want to offer top quality products to at least, let's say, mid-income consumers, we should look for such markets. Markets that are relatively affluent or relatively wealthy. Well, Japanese market, one of the wealthiest. The Canadian market, in terms of wealth, a really affluent market. Arab countries, some Arab states, definitely as well. So we might think of creating a more comprehensive strategy where, in terms of where we should go, where we should export, where we should move. On the one hand, one might say, yeah, we should be everywhere. But actually, in a country where income per capita is around $6 on average, we have rather the probability of making money is rather low. Yeah, but those who buy these products, they're not mid-level income. If their average is $7, well, there is a group of people who are above this average, right? And if they are above this average, maybe they can afford our products. In China, for example, I think that in China, this over-average group is large enough, populous enough, that they can handle our goods. Yeah, well, looks good. But only given that we can achieve a certain economies of scale, where, because if you are trying to enter a new market, it costs you money. You have to invest. You're not making money from day one. You're investing first. Whether you're a big company or a small company, it's always something that costs you money. There's always a risk, and there's always the cost of building your a bit of time in this session. I would like to refer to something that it has been reverberating quite strongly, namely local investment in production and processing. On the one hand, local investment would be a solution to many of our problems, actually. So, for example, certain distances, physical distances, could be shortened. And also, it would be a stronger sort of foothold if you have local production there. You have a stronger foothold in this country, a stronger position. But also, you mentioned all the risks. You mentioned all these challenges and limitations. And these risks and challenges and limitations are, of course, greater if you are over there versus over here. An exporter can, of course, secure a batch of products sent to their country. There are insurance companies, there are loans for that, to make sure that you send successfully your goods to another country, but that's one story. But to produce somewhere, to have a facility somewhere to produce stuff, that's a whole different ballgame. We talked about the fact that Polish producers are very much distributed, very much fragmented due to our history. So I would say our capability, our capacity to spend a lot of money and build production facilities in a remote place, that's tough. So do you think local investments, investing in producing and processing food locally, is it a reality that Polish companies should be thinking right now, given all the limitations and risks? Is it a topic for now, or maybe this topic is still way off and we should just focus on typical exports? What do you think? Maybe I'm asking, well, this question first will go to our speaker from China, who's located in China. Well, of course, very happy to answer. I'm afraid that if we're talking about exporting into China, our exports into China, well, the volume is not enough to make it worthwhile to shift production into China. From my perspective, looking at this market, the most important thing would be for Polish businesses to invest in representative offices, to have representation in the field, to have an agent, a trade agent. But it would be best to have your own company set up, a small company, a small team set up, because geographical distance to China, that's one thing. Time zones, it's a different time zone, so we cannot communicate quickly with China if we are in Poland. There are some technological obstacles, of course, like the Chinese hardly handle email. In China, email is totally not a tool to communicate with someone in business. Business email, this is something that doesn't exist. They use all sorts of messenger apps. So in China, they expect you to answer them via a messenger platform, not an email, within 2 to 3 minutes. This is what they expect. But given our time difference, would be very difficult if you're not over there. So definitely those companies who have built their small representative offices, even with 1 or 2 people, they're doing much better. We know that it costs money to set up a small operation in China, but still, to me, it could be cheaper than delegating one person in Poland who would only deal with China, but being based in Poland. Not really, because, well, having someone in China, especially if this person speaks Chinese or speaks Mandarin, they'd be much more efficient, much more effective in responding to certain queries, questions, and so on, because building your network, that's one story, but then you have to nourish this network, you have to maintain these contacts and solve all sorts of problems that people may have. Polish businesses who export to China, sometimes they may or if they haven't exported to China, they don't know how many problems importers have to deal with. And if importers have certain issues, then exporters have to respond immediately, giving them the right documents and helping them out so that they don't lose money. So to me, that's at least in China, that's the most important thing. And this is what Polish businesses should do, set up their representative offices here. Because it's not just about products. It's about building networks. It's about helping importers solve problems. And, of course, building your brand through your presence. In the times of pandemic, well, the pandemic showed us very, very clearly that if there's no way of you entering China, and maybe there will be no opportunity for you to enter China for the time being, the winners are companies who already have their representative offices in China. Because those who are not here physically, even participating in trade shows, in all sorts of events, it's very difficult for you to do that if you're not over there. So if, any company who is willing to go for it, set up representative offices in China, I think it will be easier for them to operate, day to day, to do day-to-day business. Right, we have hit the last quarter of our debate. So this question is a little bit of an opportunity to maybe make some closing remarks. Andrzej, very soon I will give you the floor. But I'm also curious about what Justyna has to say in response to what Małgorzata said. Małgorzata talked about China, but you are talking about another huge market, namely Nigeria. So what do you think? So in terms of what's your best calling card? Maybe your best calling card in Nigeria would be your own representative office. Maybe it's the best idea, or is it purely science fiction? Or is it possible? I think it's very much possible. However, we have to look at things, each time you want to invest in Nigeria, you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. In every sector, it's different. But I always encourage Polish businesses to come up with creative business models, not just exporting, not just producing locally. Sometimes, just like John said, you can combine imports with exports. You could think about powder milk, for example. In order to import powder milk to Nigeria, you have to have a license. But you can only get this license when you partly invest in this business locally in Nigeria. So maybe if you're a Polish company who produces powder milk, you can maybe launch or ramp up to 6% of your total production in Nigeria, and then you're getting your license, and then 94% of your production you can still import into Nigeria or export into Nigeria. So there's all different ways. So please get in touch with us, and we're trying to look for best business models for everyone. Poland is also invests a lot of commodities like sesame seeds, or it imports cashews, for example, from Nigeria. So we can find some synergies here. So think long term, and just like you said, everything starts with trade. If your trade balance, if your trade is growing, and if your sales are growing and your product is sort of catching on, then you can continue. You can think of further investments. Andrzej Gartner, you represent producers of food, so if my question makes sense, tell me.
Yeah, it makes sense, absolutely. But the answer to this question is not so easy, because if we look at what we care the most from the point of view of the development of Polish economy insofar as food processing, we want produce here. We want to create jobs here. We want to buy raw materials here, process them, and export them with profit. This is the logics, right, of this approach. And I think it's difficult to steer away from this logic. So for sure, what's more valuable is the investments of Polish companies in Poland and also foreign companies in Poland. Why not? But about creating jobs here and buying raw materials here from Polish farmers, that makes sense. But on the other hand, we also know that it's impossible to build strong, big companies that are not the size of a given country, but they're big concerns, international concerns. And we have such in Poland, which are developing through the acquisition of enterprises in other countries, like Maspex, for instance, has used this strategy and has several enterprises bought, for instance, in Romania, but also a Polish company that has bought quite a big company in the UK, a sweets company. Sweets producing company. So if we look at these directions of development of the largest Polish companies, such investments will exist, and undoubtedly they support foreign expansion. Of course, it seems much safer, nevertheless, to buy enterprises in a given country and not building something from scratch. And these strategies are being used by the largest companies, and this is why they achieve quite great profits. So we have to know that this is related to risk. But if we would think in a complex way about supporting exports in a given country, I think it would be good to invest in the distribution network. Orlen, for instance, has made the first step and has opened the first bistro cafe, I think, in the Czech Republic. So this is a Polish shop or Polish store from the Polish retail. And this is something which is unappreciated here, because it was said a long time ago, who has trade can rule whatever is sold, whatever is exported in a given country. So I think that such investments, even such initial construction, even in smaller countries, smaller, not so full of investments, retail chains make sense. I also agree with the lady from China in the fact that building factories in China by Polish enterprises doesn't make much sense. It is true that we should really choose trade. Yeah, we can build different platforms, also the platforms for electronic trade and sales forces that function in a given country. So I think that this is a much better strategy. So there is no one answer to your question, but there are many paths, many possibilities of development through investing in other countries on various investment levels. Yes, I was thinking that such an investment doesn't have to be an investment per se, but a key in order to reach the market, to show Polish economy, to show the Polish enterprise, like this example with the license for selling formula or powdered milk in Nigeria. This fits very well. Master Andrzej wanted to, I just wanted to add, and in order to open a business, including food business, you need to shareholder from that country. And this is not a rare practice. We have to remember about that. This is what happens in Russia. But this is not anything new, because to sell something, we need a trade partner. Yeah, exactly. But this is a bit different, because we need a shareholder, yeah? Sometimes co-owner, a partner. This is good, but also risky. But not necessarily in faraway markets, although in Poland, right? It happens. Yeah, you're reading my mind, because I wanted to tackle that theme, that subject. I just wanted to add something. The investment can have a varied nature. If we have a company, a greenfield company, so there's nothing, and we need to build a plant a factory. This is an extreme example. But as Małgosia said, this can be a trade office, a representative, besides MMA, so mergers and acquisitions. I would like to pay attention to one thing, the problem with succession in the Western countries. Very often we hear that companies that have been operating for hundreds of years at times have problems because nobody wants to take over the business. So maybe this is also a path that under the local brand there would be a young Polish entrepreneur. Yeah, they would learn their brand, they would use their contacts, and using these advantages maybe organize sending Polish products from Poland and give jobs. Yeah, there are such examples. Unfortunately, right now, I have to admit that I don't remember them exactly, but I know for sure that I've read about companies, food companies producing food stuff in Western Europe, which were at least partially, their shares were taken over by Polish entrepreneurs. I'm very much curious what Mr. John Clarke would like to say about that, because we're talking about opening markets or opening a market by Polish investment. But could we imagine a European investment on any market to create a channel in which European goods would go to that market more broadly compared to up to now?
I'm not sure that I'm the best qualified person to speculate on that. Let me rather focus on two issues which have been raised in the last few minutes. One of the colleagues on the panel referred to the previous Commissioner Hogan, his presence in Dubai, along with a lot of European and Polish companies, and that's going to continue. The current Agriculture Commissioner, Mr. Wojciechowski, one of your compatriots, is very keen to pursue these high-level missions around the world, along with agri-food federations and companies. And COVID permitting, he will be doing that in the autumn in China, Japan, Vietnam and Singapore. And we're proposing that he does the same thing in 2022 in Africa, and notably in Nigeria. So that will be an opportunity for Polish companies, or either on their own or as part of the European federations, to join him in those promotional missions. Second point I wanted to make was there was some discussion about whether you should focus more on local production and consumption and short supply chains. I think that at post-COVID there is a consumer desire for more local consumption, knowing where your food comes from locally, and the new CAP, the new agricultural policy, will support that. But I think we still have to be aware of the need for diversification. It's dangerous to be too dependent on the local market, the local production for your food needs. Self-sufficiency and food security are very different things. They're often a contradiction. So we need to have a continued policy of diversification, local, national, regional in the single market, and global. And a final suggestion, you might want to look at what Ireland has been doing in the last 3 or 4 years. Ireland has decided, as a kind of a national strategy, to focus on exports, also outside the EU. They want to reduce dependency on the UK for understandable reasons. They've opened up embassies and trade missions in many emerging economies. So the government has decided to put money into having an Irish presence to promote their agri-food sector around the world, in China, in Africa, in the Middle East, and in South and Southeast Asia. And I think Poland, you're probably 5 years behind Ireland in that kind of strategy, but it's something I would invite you to look at, because I think it would be in your interest to have that kind of very visible presence in these markets for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is a certain summary of our panel, thanks to you. We have exceeded time already. If someone would like to absolutely add one sentence, this is the final call. I understand that we accept the summary by Mr. John Clarke. Thank you very much for that. We will finish our panel. We will finish our discussion. This was about Polish agri-food products on external markets. That was the subject of our meeting. Thank you all for all the voices, all the interventions, all thoughts that you have shared with us. We had Mr. Łukasz Grabowski with us in the studio, and online Małgorzata Zawisza and Justyna Sitarska, Andrzej Chodkowski, Krzysztof Dec, Andrzej Gantner, and Mr. John Clarke. Thank you very much. I wish you a great afternoon, and I recommend all those in Poland to reach to their information sources, which are right now in Poland, because I have information that the government has introduced new restrictions regarding lockdown. So I think we should find out what awaits us in the nearest days and weeks. Thank you very much, and see you, I hope, during the next